London, September, 1816. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of Winter's house in Grosvenor Square, casting long shadows across the Turkish carpet that had once been magnificent, but now showed the wear of 8 months without proper care. Lady Sophia Winters sat at her late father's mahogany desk, the leather-bound ledger open before her, and confronted the numbers that would destroy everything she had ever known. £40,000 in gaming debts. The Hampshire estate already sold to satisfy the most pressing creditors. 6 weeks until Michaelmas, when this London house would be surrendered, and her 3 younger sisters would face a world that devoured young women without fortune or protection. She pressed her fingers to her temples, willing away the headache that had plagued her for weeks, and thought of Lucy's trusting smile, Helen's brilliant mind, Emily's innocent laughter. At 24, Sophia had raised them all after their mother died, bringing Emily into the world. She had been sister and mother both, had sacrificed her own debut season to ensure theirs would be perfect, had turned down 2 proposals from suitable gentlemen because her father needed her to manage the household. Now her father was 8 months in his grave, and his legacy was ruin. If stories of sacrifice and impossible choices move your heart, subscribe now and join us on this journey. You won't want to miss what happens next. The letter sat beside the ledger, Lord Dalton's familiar script offering what he termed a solution. His nephew by marriage, the Earl of Winterbourne, required a wife. The settlement would be generous beyond reason. £25,000 for her sisters immediately, a jointure of £4,000 per year should she survive him, complete autonomy over the household management. Lord Dalton's carefully worded explanation had made one thing abundantly clear, framing the union not merely as a necessity, but as a mutual rescue. He described the Earl as a man entombed in his own estate, in desperate need of a châtelaine to restore order to a life abandoned to shadows. However, the subtext remained stark. This was not a love match, this was a transaction. The Earl of Winterbourne was 32 years old, had killed his closest friend and cousin in a duel 4 years prior, and had lived in self-imposed exile in Cumbria ever since. His former betrothed, the dead man's sister, had broken their engagement within days of the tragedy. Society called him the cursed Earl. He sought a wife to manage his households and eventually provide an heir, nothing more. Sophia closed the ledger with trembling hands. She thought of Lucy, sweet and trusting, who would be sent to some cruel household as a governess, her gentle spirit crushed by thankless labor. She thought of Helen, brilliant and observant, who would wither as a poor relation in some distant cousin's home, her sharp mind dulled by embroidery and false pleasantries. She thought of Emily, barely 16, who would be devoured by a world that showed no mercy to beautiful girls without protection. The choice was no choice at all. She reached for her writing desk and began composing her acceptance before she could reconsider. Her hand remained steady as she sealed the letter, though her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She would not tell her sisters until after the arrangements were finalized. Let them have a few more weeks of hope before they learned the price of their security. Lord Winterbourne arrived 3 days later at precisely 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Sophia had sent her sisters on an errand to Bond Street, ostensibly to select ribbons they could scarcely afford, ensuring she would face this interview alone. Mrs. Fielding, their aging housekeeper, announced him with visible trepidation. The Earl's reputation had preceded him even into the servants' quarters. He was taller than Sophia had imagined, perhaps 6 feet, with dark hair showing threads of premature silver at the temples. His face held an austere handsomeness, all sharp angles and controlled strength, marred by a thin scar along his jaw that spoke of violence survived. But it was his eyes that arrested her, storm gray and holding such profound pain that she forgot to curtsy for a full 3 seconds. He executed a perfect bow, his movements suggesting military precision despite a barely perceptible hesitation in his left leg. Peninsula War veteran, Lord Dalton had mentioned. The injury was subtle, but permanent. "Lady Sophia." His voice was deeper than she expected, roughened as though from long disuse. I apologize for the directness of this interview. Lord Dalton has informed me of your circumstances, and I believe there is little purpose in dancing around the nature of this proposal." She gestured toward the worn settee, grateful for his bluntness. False courtship would have been unbearable. "Please sit. May I offer tea?" "Thank you. No." He remained standing until she settled into the chair opposite, then took his seat with the same controlled precision. "I require a wife to manage my households, both in London and at Winterbourne Hall in Cumbria. I will eventually require an heir, though there is no immediate urgency in that matter. In exchange, I offer £25,000 to be settled upon your sisters immediately, ensuring their futures and dowries. You will receive a jointure of £4,000 per year should you survive me, and complete autonomy over household management." He paused, his grey eyes meeting hers with unflinching directness. "I spend the majority of my time at Winterbourne Hall. I do not require you to entertain, participate in society, or perform any of the usual social obligations expected of a countess. I prefer solitude and will not burden you with unwanted company. This is a marriage of convenience, Lady Sophia, but I expect you to fulfill all duties as my wife in every respect." The heat that flooded Sophia's cheeks was mortifying, but she maintained her composure. She understood precisely what was being purchased, and the terms being laid bare. Before she could formulate her response, the drawing-room door burst open. Emily, having apparently escaped Mrs. Fielding's supervision, swept in with her arms full of ribbon samples and her face alight with the sort of excitement only a 15-year-old could muster over something so trivial. "Sophia, you simply must see these. The shopkeeper said the rose would complement my complexion perfectly, and I thought perhaps for Helen's birthday we might." She stopped mid-sentence, her smile freezing as she registered the stranger in their drawing-room. The ribbons slithered from her arms in a cascade of silk, pooling at her feet in a rainbow of forgotten color. Lord Winterbourne rose immediately, executing another perfect bow. "You must be Miss Emily. Lord Dalton spoke of your fondness for natural history." A striking change came over his features. The harsh lines softened, the pain in his eyes receding as he observed Emily. He crossed to where the ribbons had fallen and began gathering them with surprising care, presenting them back to her with grave courtesy rather than condescension. "I particularly admire this azure. It reminds me of the bluebells that carpet the woods near Winterbourne Hall each spring." "Have you ever seen a proper bluebell wood, Miss Emily?" Emily's natural exuberance reasserted itself. "Oh, no, my lord, never. Are they truly as beautiful as the poets claim? And is it true that robins nest among them? I found a robin's nest in our garden last spring, you see, and I watched the eggs hatch and the chicks fledge, and it was the most marvelous thing." She continued speaking, her words tumbling over each other in her enthusiasm, and Lord Winterbourne listened with what appeared to be genuine attention. He asked questions about her observations, nodded at her descriptions, and for several minutes became fully engaged in a conversation about garden birds with a 15-year-old girl. Sophia watched, transfixed, as warmth flickered across his austere features. She glimpsed, for just a moment, the man he must have been before tragedy carved those lines into his face and buried that light beneath layers of controlled isolation. Then Emily paused for breath, and reality reasserted itself. Lord Winterbourne's expression shuddered, the walls slamming back into place with almost audible force. He turned to Sophia with renewed formality. "I should not impose further upon your afternoon. If you find my terms acceptable, Lady Sophia, my solicitor will call tomorrow to finalize the arrangements. The settlement for your sisters can be completed within the week, and I would propose we marry once the banns have been read, 3 weeks hence." His gaze held hers, and she saw something flicker in those grey depths. Not hope, precisely, but perhaps a question. "Are you certain? Can you truly accept what I offer, knowing what I am?" She rose, her spine straight, her decision made 8 months ago when her father took his own life rather than face his creditors. Your terms are acceptable, Lord Winterbourne. My solicitor will be available to meet with yours at your earliest convenience. He nodded once, sharp and decisive, then took his leave with the same military precision that marked all his movements. Emily watched him go with open curiosity, then turned to Sophia with questions dancing in her bright eyes. "Who was that gentleman?" she asked. "Why was he here?" she pressed. "Sophia, your face has gone quite pale. Are you unwell?" Sophia drew her youngest sister close, breathing in the rosewater scent of her hair, and prepared to shatter 3 hearts with the news of her sacrifice. They married 3 weeks later at St. George's Church in Hanover Square. The ceremony was sparse, attended only by Lord Dalton, Sophia's 3 sisters, and the necessary solicitors to witness the settlement documents. Lucy wept throughout, her handkerchief pressed to her mouth. Helen watched with her characteristic sharp observation, missing nothing. Emily clutched Sophia's hand during the vows, her grip fierce and protective. Lord Winterbourne, now simply Nicholas to Sophia in the privacy of her thoughts though never aloud, spoke his vows in that same deep, controlled voice. He slipped a gold band set with Winterbourne diamonds onto her finger with hands that did not tremble. When the vicar pronounced them man and wife, he kissed her cheek with distant courtesy, his lips barely brushing her skin. The wedding breakfast was held at Winter's house, a meal prepared by Mrs. Fielding with more care than ingredients. Nicholas spoke little, though he answered Lucy's gentle questions about Winterbourne Hall with patient detail. He seemed to understand, with surprising perception, that her fears for Sophia's future needed soothing. They departed for Cumbria the following morning. Nicholas had arranged for Sophia's sisters to remain at Winter's house for the present, the lease extended through his generosity, with Mrs. Fielding to act as chaperone. The settlement had been paid in full the day after the banns were posted. Lucy would debut next season with a dowry that would attract respectable suitors. Helen had already received approval to attend a select ladies' academy known for its rigorous curriculum. Emily would have her final years of childhood in the only home she remembered. The price had been paid, the transaction complete. The journey north took 3 days. Nicholas rode outside the carriage for the majority of the trip, claiming a preference for fresh air, though Sophia suspected confined spaces oppressed him in ways he would not articulate. When they stopped at posting inns each evening, he saw her settled with scrupulous courtesy, ensured she had everything required for her comfort, then retired to his own chambers with murmured apologies about correspondence requiring his attention. On the 3rd day, as the landscape grew wilder and the cultivated fields gave way to untamed moors, Sophia caught her first glimpse of Winterbourne Hall. It loomed from the moorland like something from a Gothic tale. Ancient grey stone walls rising 3 stories high, ivy clinging to the southern exposure, crenellated towers at each corner speaking of medieval origins. The gardens that surrounded it had once been formal. She could see the ghost of geometric patterns in the overgrown hedgerows, but time and neglect had allowed nature to begin asserting its wild dominion over the once ordered boxwoods. It should have been forbidding. Instead, Sophia found it achingly beautiful. The household staff assembled in the entrance hall to greet their new mistress. Mrs. Blackwood, the housekeeper, was perhaps 50 years of age with steel-gray hair and kind eyes that assessed Sophia with the frank appraisal of someone who had seen much and judged little. She curtsied with genuine respect rather than mere duty. "Welcome to Winterbourne Hall, my lady. We are honored to have you here." The other servants echoed her welcome. Sophia noted how their eyes went to Nicholas with something beyond the usual deference due an employer. There was concern there, and fierce loyalty, the sort that came only from having witnessed someone at their worst and choosing to stand beside them regardless. Nicholas handed her into Mrs. Blackwood's capable care with the same distant courtesy that had marked their entire acquaintance. "Mrs. Blackwood will show you to your apartments and help you settle. I trust you will find everything satisfactory. If you require anything, you need only ask." He bowed, then disappeared into what she would later learn was his study. closing the heavy oak door with a finality that suggested she should not expect to see him again that evening. Her apartments occupied the entire eastern wing of the second floor. The Countess's suite had not been occupied in decades, Mrs. Blackwood explained, as she opened doors to reveal rooms that took Sophia's breath away. The bedchamber was vast, with windows overlooking the wild moors and a 4-poster bed hung with emerald velvet. An adjoining sitting room held a pianoforte, bookshelves, and furniture that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. "The Earl had everything fitted up when he knew you were coming, my lady," Mrs. Blackwood said, pride evident in her voice. "He personally selected the pianoforte, said he remembered Lord Dalton mentioning your fondness for music." That small detail, that unexpected consideration, caused an uncomfortable tightness in Sophia's chest. She pressed her hand against her breastbone, willing away the sensation. A connecting door led to what could only be the Earl's chambers. Mrs. Blackwood followed her gaze and cleared her throat delicately. "His lordship's apartments, my lady. The door is never locked, should you need anything during the night." The implication hung in the air between them. Sophia's cheeks heated, but she merely nodded her understanding. The first weeks established a careful choreography. They met in the breakfast room where the atmosphere permitted a comfortable silence, Nicholas reading his correspondence while she poured tea, suggesting a domestic intimacy developing within the formality. Dinner was served at 6, and he occasionally joined her in the drawing room for an hour after the meal. His conversation was unfailingly courteous, focused on household matters or local concerns, never venturing into anything personal. He asked about her comfort, whether the staff attended her satisfactorily, if there was anything she required. He never touched her beyond the occasional formal gesture, offering his arm when propriety demanded. He never visited her chambers, though that connecting door remained unlocked. Sophia threw herself into managing the household with the same focused determination she had once applied to raising her sisters. Winterbourne Hall had been neglected for too long, not through any fault of the staff, but simply from lack of direction. The late Countess, Nicholas's mother, had died when he was 18. No woman had held authority here in 14 years. She discovered account books in disarray, linens that needed replacing, rooms closed off and gathering dust. The work was satisfying in ways she had not anticipated. Each improvement felt like a small victory, evidence that she could be useful even in this strange marriage of convenience. She also discovered the portrait gallery on a rainy afternoon 3 weeks into her residence. The long room occupied the southern wing of the 3rd floor, its walls covered in paintings chronicling generations of Winterbourne history. Sophia walked slowly along the gallery, studying the faces of Nicholas's ancestors, until she reached a family grouping that stopped her in her tracks. The painting was perhaps 8 years old, showing a young Nicholas who could not have been more than 24. His face was unlined, open in a way she had never seen, his smile genuine and unguarded. Beside him stood another young man, so similar in coloring and build that they might have been brothers rather than cousins. Edmund Beaumont. It could be no one else. That was painted the summer before everything changed. Sophia turned to find Mrs. Blackwood standing in the doorway, a tea tray in her capable hands. The housekeeper crossed to set the tray on a small table, then stood beside Sophia, both women studying the portrait of 2 young men whose futures had seemed limitless. Master Edmund was his lordship's closest friend since their days at Eton, Mrs. Blackwood said quietly. Closer than brothers. The duel was a terrible misunderstanding, my lady. His lordship has never spoken of what truly occurred that night, but those of us who know him understand he would never have drawn his sword against Master Edmund without the gravest cause. She paused, her weathered hands clasped before her. He has punished himself far more severely than society ever could. The nightmares wake the household some nights. He rides out on the moors in dangerous weather as though courting death might somehow atone for the one he could not prevent. Before the tragedy, this house rang with his laughter. I have not heard that sound in 4 years. Sophia studied the painted face of the man who would become her husband, trying to reconcile that open joy with the austere control of the Earl she knew. What happened to his betrothed, Lady Miranda Beaumont? She broke the engagement 3 days after the duel, refused even to see him when he tried to explain. Mrs. Blackwood's mouth tightened with disapproval. She was Edmund's younger sister, and grief made her cruel. His lordship accepted her condemnation without protest, as he accepted society's, as he accepted his own father's disgust before the old Earl died that same winter. The housekeeper turned to face Sophia directly, her expression fierce with loyalty. "You are good for him, my lady. I have seen small changes these past weeks. He takes meals at regular hours now. He has not ridden out in dangerous weather since you arrived. Yesterday, I heard him speaking with Mr. Patterson about expanding the library, something he has not shown interest in for years. Whatever the circumstances of your marriage, your presence here is a blessing." After Mrs. Blackwood departed, Sophia remained in the gallery, staring at that portrait of 2 young men whose friendship ended in blood and guilt. She thought of the man who slept in the adjoining chambers, but never crossed the threshold. The man who treated her with distant courtesy, but ensured her every comfort. The man who had softened so completely when Emily babbled about robins, revealing glimpses of who he had been before tragedy reshaped him. She had married him to save her sisters. She had not expected to care what became of him. That realization should have frightened her. Instead, it settled over her heart like the first snow of winter, inevitable and transforming everything it touched. The rhythm of life at Winterbourne Hall gradually became familiar. Sophia rose early, attended to correspondence and household matters through the morning, took walks on the moors when weather permitted. She played the pianoforte each afternoon in her sitting room, finding solace in Mozart and Handel. She did not know for several weeks that Nicholas arranged his schedule to be nearby during those afternoon hours. Did not realize he positioned himself in the library or his study, close enough to hear the music filtering through the ancient walls, maintaining the careful distance his conscience apparently demanded while seeking whatever comfort her playing provided. It was Mrs. Blackwood who finally mentioned it, casually noting how pleasant it was to hear music in the house again, and how his lordship had taken to working in the library rather than his study during the afternoons. "Says the light is better for reading," the housekeeper added with a knowing smile. "Though I notice he sits in the chair nearest the wall you share, my lady, and he never turns pages during your performances." That evening, emboldened by this intelligence, Sophia took her courage in both hands. When Nicholas rose to depart the drawing room at his usual hour, she spoke before fear could silence her. "Would you care to remain, my lord? I thought I might play for a while, and you are welcome to stay if the music would not disturb your reading." He froze mid-bow, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, she thought he would refuse with his typical polite excuse. Then his shoulders relaxed fractionally, and he inclined his head. "I would be honored, my lady. Thank you." He settled into the chair by the fire while she crossed to the pianoforte, hyper-aware of his presence in a way that made her fingers clumsy on the keys. She began with Bach, something technically demanding that required her complete concentration, and gradually lost herself in the familiar patterns. The music filled the room, not merely as notes on a page, but as an emotional language that spoke the words they could not say. It vibrated through the floorboards and hung in the dusty air, a bridge spanning the silence between them. When she finished the piece and turned, she found Nicholas watching her with an expression of such naked longing that her breath caught. He seemed unaware of his lapse, the careful control stripped away by the music's power, and in that unguarded moment, she saw the depth of his isolation, his hunger for connection, his fear of reaching for something he believed he did not deserve. Then he blinked, and the walls slammed back into place. He rose with his usual careful precision. That was extraordinary. "Thank you for allowing me to listen. I should not keep you further. Good evening, Lady Sophia." He was gone before she could respond, leaving her alone with the echoes of both music and that brief glimpse of the man behind the armor. December arrived with frost, painting the moor grasses silver and a bitter wind that whistled through even Winterbourne Hall's thick walls. Sophia invited her sisters for Christmas, knowing Nicholas would not object to guests who kept to the family wing and made no social demands. Their arrival transformed the ancient hall. Lucy's gentle warmth and Helen's sharp observations and Emily's exuberant youth breathing life into rooms that had been too quiet for too long. To Sophia's surprise, Nicholas did not retreat further into isolation. Instead, he engaged with her sisters with the same patient attention he had shown Emily that first day. He arranged for appropriate riding horses so Emily could explore the estate. He procured rare botanical texts for Helen, whose fascination with natural philosophy had blossomed at her academy. He accompanied Lucy to the pianoforte, revealing an accomplished musical talent he had kept hidden, his baritone joining her soprano in duets that made Sophia's throat tighten with emotions she dared not examine too closely. Even Helen, ever the skeptic, had cornered him regarding his intentions toward their sister one evening. Whatever he answered must have been spoken with absolute sincerity, for Helen treated him with cautious respect thereafter. She watched him with her sisters and saw, again and again, glimpses of the man he had been before Edmund died, the man capable of warmth and humor and genuine connection, the man buried beneath 4 years of self-imposed penance. 2 days before Christmas, a carriage arrived unannounced, bearing a visitor whose presence shattered the fragile peace they had built. Lady Miranda Beaumont swept into Winterbourne Hall's entrance like an avenging angel draped in mourning silk. Her dark beauty was the sort poets celebrated, voluptuous and commanding, her green eyes assessing everything they touched with calculated precision. She wore black, despite 4 years having passed since Edmund's death. The widow's weeds she had no legal right to claim, serving as both armor and accusation. Sophia, returning from a walk on the moors with her sisters, found their unexpected guest already installed in the drawing room. Nicholas, standing by the fireplace with an expression carved from granite. "Lady Miranda," Sophia managed, executing a curtsy that felt absurdly inadequate. "This is unexpected. Lady Sophia." Miranda's smile held no warmth. "I apologize for arriving without notice, but business concerning the Beaumont estate required Lord Winterbourne's immediate attention. Legal documents demanding his signature as a trustee. I thought it more efficient to bring them myself rather than entrust such sensitive matters to the post." Her explanation was perfectly reasonable, yet the proprietary air she adopted suggested she felt more at home in this room than the current countess. Sophia felt her sister's curious stares, saw the tension in Nicholas's shoulders, and summoned her breeding. "Of course. One wonders at the urgency that compelled such a journey in winter, but you must be exhausted. I will have Mrs. Blackwood prepare chambers for you. Will you be staying long?" "Perhaps through Christmas, if it would not be an imposition." Miranda settled onto the settee with proprietary ease. "It has been too long since I was here, and there is much Nicholas and I need to discuss." The use of his given name, spoken with such casual intimacy, sent a blade of something uncomfortably like jealousy through Sophia's chest. She ignored the sensation, focused on arranging hospitality with the skills that had sustained her through years of social necessity. Dinner that evening was an exercise in careful conversation. Miranda dominated the table with stories of London society, the latest scandals, the most fashionable gatherings. She spoke of shared memories with Nicholas, of Edmund and their youth, of traditions they had once expected to continue. She delivered polite barbs regarding the rustic isolation of the North, subtly undermining Sophia's position, while Sophia responded with chilled, impeccable politeness that asserted her authority over the household without breaching etiquette. Sophia's sisters tried valiantly to contribute, but they were outmatched by Miranda's sophisticated confidence. Nicholas said little, his responses brief and carefully neutral, but his very silence felt like betrayal. After the meal, when Lucy, Helen, and Emily prudently retired early, Sophia found herself excluded from the drawing room where Nicholas and Miranda remained to discuss the Beaumont estate documents. She told herself this was perfectly proper, that she had no claim to involvement in matters predating her marriage, that her growing unease was simply exhaustion from playing hostess to an unwelcome guest. But when she passed by the study an hour later, the door slightly ajar, she heard Miranda's voice and could not force herself to move past. "I was wrong, Nicholas. So terribly, unforgivably wrong." Miranda's words carried the weight of rehearsed emotion. "I have come to understand, through years of grief and reflection, that Edmund's death was not your fault. You did what honor demanded, what any gentleman would have done. I erred catastrophically in breaking our engagement, in adding my condemnation to society's, in abandoning you when you needed support most desperately." Sophia's hand pressed against the door frame, her knuckles white. "That is generous of you to say, Miranda, but unnecessary." Nicholas's voice was low, harder to hear. "What happened 4 years ago cannot be undone. You followed your heart and your grief. I do not fault you for either. But I fault myself." The rustle of silk suggested movement, Miranda rising perhaps, crossing toward him. "I have spent 4 years in mourning, not just for Edmund, but for what we lost, Nicholas, the future we planned, the love we shared. I realize now that love has not diminished, not truly. It has endured despite time and distance and all the pain between us. I still love you. I have always loved you, and I know in my heart that you feel the same." Sophia waited, her entire body taut as a drawn bowstring, for Nicholas to deny it, to speak of his marriage, of changed circumstances, of the impossibility of what Miranda suggested. Instead, silence stretched between them like a chasm. When Nicholas finally spoke, his voice was too quiet for Sophia to discern the words, but his tone unmistakably gentle, perhaps even tender. She turned and fled before she could hear more, her slippers silent on the Turkish runner as she navigated corridors she had memorized in darkness. She did not flee to her chambers, but to the conservatory at the far end of the house, a glass-walled sanctuary where tropical plants survived despite Cumbria's bitter winters through some combination of clever design and stubborn will. She sank onto a bench beneath a potted palm, her hands pressed to her chest. She had received exactly what she bargained for, yet the sting of betrayal was sharper than any blade. Love had never been part of their agreement, but she had been foolish enough to let it grow in the silence between them. The conservatory door opened. Sophia looked up, expecting Mrs. Blackwood or perhaps one of her sisters, and found Nicholas silhouetted against the lamplight from the corridor. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him, his movements careful, as though approaching something wild that might bolt. "Sophia, I saw you pass the library. I wanted to ensure you were well." "Perfectly well, my lord." Her voice sounded distant even to her own ears, frost coating each syllable. "I required some air. The drawing room was rather warm." He studied her face, his gray eyes shadowed in the dim light filtering through glass walls. "Did you hear what passed between Miranda and myself?" Honesty had always been Sophia's weakness. Some of it. Enough. "I see." He crossed to stand before the windows overlooking the darkened moors, his hands clasped behind his back in that military posture he adopted when troubled. "Then you deserve an explanation." "I deserve nothing beyond what our marriage contract stipulates, my lord." The formality was intentional, a return to the careful distance they had maintained before music and shared meals began eroding her defenses. "Your past with Lady Miranda is none of my concern. It is, however, if her presence causes you distress." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Miranda came with an offer I had not anticipated. She has connections within the church through her family, powerful connections that could arrange an annulment on the grounds that our marriage has not been properly consummated." The words landed like physical blows. Sophia felt the blood drain from her face, her hands tightening on the bench until her knuckles ached. Nicholas continued, his voice carefully neutral. She has offered to ensure your sisters remain provided for, the settlement repaid in full through Beaumont funds, as though our marriage never occurred. I would be free to wed the woman I once chose, and you would be free to find a husband who could offer more than cold courtesy and a house full of shadows. So this was how it ended. Not through cruelty or scandal, but through careful negotiation and everyone acting from the highest possible motives. She would be set aside, discarded like an experiment that failed to yield desired results, while Nicholas reclaimed the love he had never truly relinquished. Sophia rose, her spine straight, her breeding demanding dignity even as her world crumbled. I see. Then it shall be done. I will agree to whatever arrangements you deem appropriate. My sisters are safe, their futures secured. I fulfilled my part of our bargain. That you would see me comfortably settled afterward is generous beyond expectation. She moved toward the door, needing to escape before the tears threatening to unmake her could fall. She would not give him that, would not burden him with emotions he had never invited, and did not return. His hand caught her arm as she passed, the touch burning through the thin silk of her evening gown. She stopped but did not turn, could not bear to meet his eyes. Sophia. Just her name, roughened by some emotion she could not identify. You misunderstand. I think I understand perfectly, my lord. Lady Miranda has offered you a second chance, an opportunity to reclaim what was lost. Why would you not accept? She clearly still loves you, and you spoke to her with such gentleness. I do not fault you for choosing to correct a mistake forced upon you by circumstances. His grip on her arm tightened fractionally. Look at me. She shook her head, the tears too close now to risk it. Sophia, please. The please, so unexpected from a man who commanded rather than pleaded, broke through her resistance. She turned, keeping her gaze fixed somewhere near his cravat, and waited. He released her arm but did not step back, his presence overwhelming in the small space between them. The conversation you overheard was not what you imagine. Miranda's arrival was indeed a shock, but not for the reasons you suppose. Her offer of reconciliation reminded me precisely why I never truly loved her, not in the way that matters. Sophia's eyes snapped to his face despite her resolution. He met her gaze steadily, something raw and uncertain flickering in those gray depths. She was a suitable choice, he continued, each word seemingly dragged from somewhere deep and reluctant. Appropriate family, pleasant company, shared history. But there was no fire between us, no depth of feeling that survived adversity. When Edmund died, what little we shared burned away like morning mist. I thought myself content with that emptiness, thought it safer than risking genuine connection again. He lifted his hand, hesitated, then gently touched her cheek with fingers that trembled slightly. Then you arrived, you, with your quiet strength and fierce loyalty to your sisters, with your grace under impossible circumstances, with your refusal to be diminished by tragedy or reduced to mere transaction. You transformed this house, brought life back to rooms that had been tombs. You played Mozart in the afternoons, and I found myself rearranging my entire day just to be near enough to hear. You spoke to the tenants with genuine interest, remembered their children's names, cared about matters I had stopped noticing years ago. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, catching a tear she had not realized escaped. My heart has become irrevocably entangled with yours, Sophia. Desperately, completely, in ways that terrify me because I never intended to love again after Edmund, never believed myself capable of it. I kept my distance from fear, not indifference. Fear that you would turn away if you knew the depth of my feelings. Fear that I would destroy the fragile peace we had built. Fear that I was too damaged, too stained by guilt and tragedy to deserve the light you brought into my darkness. Sophia could not breathe, could not think beyond the impossible words he was speaking, the impossible hope unfurling in her chest. The night of the snowstorm, he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "When I thought I had lost you, when I found that overturned carriage and saw blood on your face, something inside me shattered completely. I realized in that moment what I had been denying for months. You are not a transaction, or a convenience, or a solution to loneliness. You are everything I never dared hope for, and infinitely more than I deserve." His forehead came to rest against hers, his eyes closing as though the contact pained him. When Miranda arrived speaking of second chances, my first thought was not of what we once shared, but of you. Of how every word she spoke, every memory she invoked, only emphasized how little I had felt for her compared to what I feel for you. The conversation you heard was me telling her, as gently as I could manage, that my heart belongs entirely to my wife. That I wish her well, but can offer nothing beyond distant friendship. That the man she remembers died with Edmund, and the man I am now loves someone else with depth that leaves no room for anything else. Sophia's hands came up to grip his coat, anchoring herself against the tide of emotion threatening to sweep away all her careful control. "I thought," she managed, her voice breaking, "I thought you wanted to be free of me, that you regretted our marriage, that I was simply a duty you performed with characteristic honor, but no genuine feeling." "God, no." The words came out fierce, almost anguished. "You are the best thing that has happened to me in 4 years. The only good thing, truth be told. I am sorry I made you doubt that. Sorry I was too much of a coward to speak sooner, to show you what you mean to me." "I am equally a coward," Sophia confessed, the words tumbling out now that honesty had been established. "I fell in love with you despite every rational argument against it, despite our practical arrangement, despite my determination to guard my heart. I told myself it was foolish, that I had no right to want more than security, that loving you would only lead to heartbreak." His arms came around her then, pulling her against his chest where she could feel the thundering of his heart. "We have been 2 fools then, circling each other in careful distance when we both wanted the same impossible thing." She tilted her face up, and he met her halfway. The kiss was nothing like the brief, formal brush of lips at their wedding. This was desperate and tender and fierce, 4 months of suppressed longing transmuting into physical expression. His hand cradled the back of her head, fingers tangling in her carefully arranged hair and undoing all the pins Mrs. Blackwood had so meticulously placed. Her hands mapped the breadth of his shoulders, learning the reality of the body she had only observed from careful distance. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Nicholas rested his forehead against hers and let out a shaky laugh. "I have shadows still, Sophia. Guilt over Edmund that has not magically disappeared because I love you. I am not an easy man, and this will not be an easy marriage in many ways. I know." She kissed him again, softer this time, a promise rather than passion. "But I am not afraid of shadows, Nicholas. And you are not alone in carrying them anymore." They stood together in the conservatory's warm dimness, 2 people who had married for the wrong reasons, discovering they had found the right person regardless. Outside, snow began to fall across the dark moors, covering old paths and creating new ones, a transformation both gradual and absolute. The remainder of Miranda's visit passed with strained civility. She departed 2 days after Christmas, pleading urgent business in London, her green eyes hard with understanding as she offered frigid congratulations on their apparent happiness. Sophia felt pity rather than triumph watching her carriage disappear down the drive. Miranda had loved Edmund and lost him, had loved Nicholas and lost him too, and now faced a future emptied of both. January brought a letter bearing the Beaumont seal but unfamiliar handwriting. Peter Beaumont, Edmund's younger brother, who had been abroad during the tragedy, requested an audience on urgent family business. He arrived on a bitter afternoon when frost turned the moors to silver. Peter was 26 now, brown-haired and pleasant-faced, bearing a striking resemblance to the Edmund of the portrait gallery. He carried a leather satchel with the care of someone transporting something precious and potentially explosive. Nicholas received him in the library, Sophia present at her husband's specific request, a breach of custom he deemed necessary for his composure. Peter declined refreshment, his manner suggesting this visit cost him considerable effort. "I have spent the past year investigating the circumstances surrounding Edmund's death," he began without preamble. "I was 17 when it happened, away at Cambridge, and I accepted the story society told because I knew no better and had no reason to question. But as I grew older, certain inconsistencies troubled me. Edmund was my brother, and I loved him. But he was also capable of cruelty when overcome by wine, and his charm often masked behavior I came to recognize as dishonorable." Nicholas stiffened beside Sophia. She reached for his hand beneath the table, lacing their fingers together, and felt him grip back with enough force to hurt. Peter withdrew a bundle of letters from his satchel. These were discovered last month during renovations to the Beaumont London house. They had fallen behind a panel in Edmund's chambers and been forgotten. Among them was a letter Edmund wrote the night before he died, addressed to you, Nicholas, but apparently never posted. He slid the yellowed paper across the mahogany surface. Nicholas made no move to take it, his face draining of color. Sophia picked it up, and after receiving his nearly imperceptible nod, began to read aloud. "Dear Nicholas, if you are reading this, I shall likely be dead and making a damned nuisance of myself as a ghost. I have this unsettled feeling tonight, as though I am standing at the edge of something dangerous. You know I never attend to such premonitions, but for once I shall be practical and set certain matters down in ink." Her voice faltered over Edmund's casual tone, the confident scrawl suggesting a man unaware these would be his final written words. "What happened with Miss Catherine was unforgivable, and you were right to challenge me. I was drunk, angry about Miranda's nagging, and I took liberties with a woman who had no recourse or protection. You saved her from consequences far worse than my unwanted attentions, and you offered to take blame for defending her honor when any gentleman with conscience would have done the same." Sophia paused, glancing at Nicholas. His jaw was rigid, his eyes fixed on nothing. "If I am killed tomorrow, know that I do not blame you. I blame only myself for being fool enough to draw on the finest swordsman I know while foxed and furious. You have been the best of friends, the brother I should have been to Peter and never managed. If I die, mourn me if you must, but do not waste your life in guilt. I would not want that. Live, Nicholas. Laugh as you used to. Find someone who deserves you more than Miranda ever did. Remember me fondly, but do not let my stupidity destroy you." The letter continued with instructions for Peter's guardianship and financial matters. But the essential message was clear. Edmund had absolved Nicholas of responsibility before the duel even occurred. Sophia lowered the paper, the rustle of dry ink loud in the quiet room. Peter cleared his throat. "I also located Miss Catherine. She is now Mrs. Chapman, living in Birmingham with her husband and 3 children. She was willing to provide a full account of what transpired that night. Edmund offered a grave insult to her person in the garden at Lady Pemberton's ball, attempted to force himself upon her, would have succeeded had you not intervened. You challenged him to protect her reputation, to ensure the matter could be framed as a disagreement between gentlemen rather than what it truly was, an assault upon a defenseless woman." He met Nicholas's hollow gaze with steady compassion. "My brother died because he made dishonorable choices, and you made honorable ones. Society condemned you because you refused to destroy an innocent woman's reputation in order to clear your own name. I am offering public vindication now, if you will accept it. Mrs. Chapman is willing to provide testimony. I will speak at White's and every other club that will hear me. Miranda has already agreed to add her voice, acknowledging she was wrong to condemn you." Nicholas finally moved, shaking his head with slow deliberation. "No. Thank you, Peter. But no. I appreciate your efforts more than I can express, and this letter means more than vindication ever could. But I will not drag Mrs. Chapman through society's judgment 4 years later simply to clear my name. I will not see Edmund's memory torn apart in drawing rooms across London. I will not put the Beaumont family through additional pain for the sake of my reputation. He stood, crossing to the window that overlooked the frozen moors. A gentleman's honor was not found in public spectacle, he knew, but in the quiet knowledge of the truth and the protection of the innocent. The people who matter know the truth, my tenants, my servants, my wife. His hand found Sophia's shoulder, squeezing gently. That is sufficient. Edmund would not want his family destroyed for my sake. Let the past remain past. Peter departed the following morning with evident respect. The letters he left behind became precious possessions, kept in Nicholas's study, where he could read Edmund's final absolution whenever guilt threatened to overwhelm him again. But truth, once revealed, has a way of spreading regardless of attempts at containment. Mrs. Chapman, moved by Nicholas's refusal to use her testimony, wrote her own account and sent it to several influential ladies of her acquaintance. Peter spoke at White's, despite Nicholas's preference for silence. Miranda, genuinely remorseful for her role in society's condemnation, added her voice to the chorus of those defending the Earl of Winterbourne. By the time spring arrived and the season commenced, Nicholas's reputation had undergone complete rehabilitation. Invitations poured in from every fashionable house in London. Hostesses who had cut him 4 years prior now courted his attendance with the desperate enthusiasm of those seeking to be on the right side of scandal. Nicholas viewed this development with wry amusement and firm resolution. I have no intention of subjecting us to society's sudden approval. They made their judgment. I made my peace with their absence. Let us remain here, where we need please no one but ourselves. But Sophia, with the strategic mind that had once managed a household on no income, and 3 sisters on non-existent prospects, saw opportunity. One exception, she suggested one evening as they sat together in the library, his head in her lap as she ran her fingers through his hair. The Beaumont ball in May. Your cousin, twice removed, Lady Beatrice Beaumont, maintains the family tradition. One appearance to show society you survived their censure and found happiness despite their best efforts to destroy you. I care nothing for society's opinion. I know, but I care for the symbolism. We began this marriage as a transaction. Let us show the world what it became instead. Let them see that love can grow in the most unlikely soil when properly tended. He turned his head to look up at her, his gray eyes holding the warmth she had once thought impossible. You simply want to dance with me. Admit it. She smiled, unrepentant. We have never danced together, not even at our wedding. I should like to waltz with my husband at least once before I grow too old to manage it. You could never be too old to manage anything. But he agreed because he could deny her nothing, and because some part of him recognized she was right about the value of public closure. The night of the Beaumont ball arrived warm and clear, late spring bringing London to full bloom. Sophia wore midnight blue silk that made her gray eyes luminous, the Winterbourne diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists. Nicholas, in formal evening attire, looked every inch the aristocrat he had been born to be, the scar on his jaw merely adding character rather than diminishing appeal. Their entrance caused the exact sensation Sophia had anticipated. Conversation stopped mid-word. Fans stilled. Every eye in the ballroom fixed on the Earl and Countess of Winterbourne as they descended the staircase with perfect synchronization, radiating a happiness that owed nothing to performance and everything to genuine feeling. They greeted Lady Beatrice, who welcomed them with tears in her eyes and gratitude for their attendance. They accepted congratulations from guests who ranged from genuinely pleased to transparently opportunistic. Sophia glimpsed her sisters across the ballroom, Lucy and Helen radiant in their own right, drawing their own circles of admirers, now that the family disgrace had been transformed to tragic romance. Then the orchestra struck up a waltz, and Nicholas bowed before her with courtly grace. "May I have this dance, Lady Sophia?" She placed her hand in his, let him lead her onto the floor, and felt the world narrow to just the two of them despite hundreds watching. He held her as though she were spun glass and starlight, infinitely precious and miraculously his. They moved together with the synchronicity of two people who had learned each other's rhythms through months of careful attention, who fit together despite never intending to fit at all. "Satisfied?" he murmured against her ear as they turned. "Immensely. Though I confess I care far less about what they think than I did when this idea first occurred to me. What changed?" She met his gaze, letting him see everything she felt reflected in her eyes. "I realized the only opinion that matters is yours, that we could live in a cottage or a palace, embraced by society or shunned by it, and I would be equally happy so long as I was with you." His grip on her waist tightened, pulling her fractionally closer than strict propriety allowed. "The cottage sounds appealing. Shall we scandalize everyone by departing immediately after this dance? We shall scandalize them by staying precisely as long as courtesy demands, dancing exactly twice more with appropriate partners, and then departing at the earliest acceptable moment to return home. Winterbourne Hall or the London house? Wherever you are is home, Nicholas." They finished the waltz to enthusiastic applause, accepted congratulations from Lord Dalton, who was taking considerable credit for the match he had arranged, submitted to brief conversations with various dignitaries, then took their leave precisely 2 hours after arriving. In the carriage returning to the London townhouse, Nicholas pulled Sophia into his lap with the sort of undignified urgency that would have scandalized society had anyone witnessed it. She went willingly, her laughter muffled against his mouth as he kissed her with the passionate intensity he no longer bothered to restrain in private. "I love you," he said against her lips, between kisses, the words still new enough to carry weight. "You saved me in every possible way a person can be saved." "The accounts between us are balanced," she replied, her pragmatic nature asserting itself even in this moment of passion. "No debts. Only profits measured in currency far more valuable than gold." 2 years later, Winterbourne Hall rang with sounds that would have seemed impossible during those first frozen months. James, named for Edmund, despite Nicholas's initial reluctance, tottered through the gardens on legs still uncertain but determined. Sarah, 6 months old, gurgled from her basket beneath a spreading oak where Sophia sat with Mrs. Blackwood, the two women having long since moved from employer and servant to something resembling friendship. Nicholas taught James to roll a hoop across the lawn, his laughter at his son's delighted shrieks, the sound Mrs. Blackwood had despaired of ever hearing again. Lucy visited frequently, married now to a scholar of modest means and tremendous kindness. Helen would wed next spring, her betrothed as brilliant as she and completely besotted. Emily, at 18, was enjoying her first season with a maturity that suggested the sacrifices she had witnessed shaped her into someone both strong and gentle. The Harvest Festival brought the entire county to Winterbourne Hall, tenants and gentry mingling with the easy familiarity Nicholas's fair stewardship had encouraged. Sophia moved through the crowds with Sarah in her arms, accepting compliments and offering congratulations, her happiness palpable enough that complete strangers smiled simply from being near her. As evening fell and the festival began winding toward conclusion, Nicholas found her by the lily pond where they had once stood on opposite sides of careful distance. He took Sarah from her arms, cradling their daughter with the confident ease of a man who had learned that love did not make him weak, but rather gave him strength he had never imagined possessing. James appeared, demanding to be lifted to his father's shoulders, and Nicholas obliged with mock protests about growing too heavy. The boy shrieked with joy at the elevated vantage point, then demanded a story. "Tell about the brave knight and clever princess," James insisted, his syntax still adorably imperfect. "Was real? Did they really live happy after?" Nicholas met Sophia's eyes across the fading light, his gaze holding the wealth of their shared history, pain transmuted into joy, duty transformed into devotion. "Yes," he said, pulling Sophia against his side with his free arm, their family united in the sort of casual intimacy that had once seemed impossible. Sometimes, when people are very fortunate and very brave, they really do live happily ever after. Not because life becomes easy or perfect, but because they find someone whose love makes even the difficult parts worth enduring. James considered this with the seriousness only a 3-year-old could muster. "Like you and Mama." "Exactly like Mama and me." Nicholas pressed a kiss to Sophia's temple, then to Sarah's downy head, then reached up to ruffle James's hair. "We were both lost, your mother and I, wandering separate paths through darkness. Then we found each other, quite by accident, and suddenly the darkness was not quite so dark anymore." Sophia leaned into her husband's solid warmth, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the ancient stones of Winterbourne Hall in shades of amber and rose. She thought of that terrified woman who had accepted a transaction to save her sisters, who had expected duty and received devotion, who had stumbled into love while trying merely to survive. "No regrets?" Nicholas murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "Not a single one." She turned her face up for his kiss, gentle and brief with their children present, but holding promise of more thorough expressions later when they were alone. "Though I confess, I never expected a business arrangement to yield such extraordinary dividends." His laughter rumbled through his chest, rich and unrestrained and free. "Only you would describe our love in financial terms." "I am a practical woman, my lord. I assess the value of my wager with considerable care." She smiled up at him, gray eyes meeting gray eyes, two souls who had found each other against all probability and chosen, again and again, to stay found. "And I can report with complete confidence that this particular union has exceeded all expectations most spectacularly." James demanded another story. Sarah began fussing for her evening feeding. The festival continued its gentle dissolution around them as tenants departed for homes filled with the harvest's bounty, as stars emerged above the darkening moors, as Winterbourne Hall settled into its ancient stones with the peace of a place finally, completely, home to those who dwelt within. They had begun as strangers bound by necessity, became partners through careful negotiation, and transformed into lovers through the stubborn insistence that even the most practical arrangement could bloom into something extraordinary. They had found their way to that rare and precious place where the best stories always end, not in perfection, for life granted no such thing, but in a love that was real and chosen and fought for, and therefore infinitely more valuable than any fairy tale. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs to hear it. Your support helps us continue creating stories of love, resilience, and hope.